I've spent most of my life putting others first. My name's Martha, and I'm 62 now. But for the last 30 years, it felt like I was just an invisible force, working for the happiness of my family, especially for my son, Jason, and his wife, Lisa. They've always been my world, even if that world demanded I give up my own dreams and needs. It started when Jason was just a boy. I gave up my own career plans as a nurse to stay home and be there for him after his father passed away, unexpectedly. Raising him alone wasn't easy. I worked double shifts, cleaning houses at night to keep the bills paid, while being the mom and dad he needed by day. I didn't complain. I never did. To me, it was normal. Sacrifice is part of being a mother. I told myself that 1,000 times. I remember the day I said no to nursing school. The acceptance letter arrived just after Jason's first chemotherapy session. He was only 10 then, and when I looked at his pale face in the hospital bed, I knew I had to be with him. So the letter sat unopened on the kitchen table, collecting dust for years. That was my first sacrifice. My dreams shelved indefinitely. Later, when Jason grew up and fell in love with Lisa, I opened my heart to her too. But when they got married and started their own family demands, I struggled to find my place. I worked tirelessly, cooking, cleaning, babysitting their kids, managing their household errands, and always smothering my own desires to keep the peace. I even skipped my sister's wedding once because Lisa had a big event, and they needed me to take care of their children. 3 major sacrifices define my life: giving up my nursing dreams, working multiple jobs to support their household, and sacrificing my own relationships with friends and family so I could be available whenever they needed me. People around me called me selfless, loving, and devoted. To them, I was the glue that held everything together. But the truth is, I saw myself as a shadow, necessary, but unnoticed, lonely underneath all the chores and smiles. I silenced my own needs so well that I hardly felt their absence anymore. I stopped asking for help, stopped hoping for recognition, and even stopped believing I deserved happiness outside of serving others. My finances barely covered the basics. I never demanded financial support, worked with what I had, and gave the rest up to help with Jason and Lisa's wedding or their kids' school fees. I lived in a small, cluttered apartment on the outskirts of town, filled with worn furniture and faded photos of moments when I was happier. A silent witness to dreams faded into the background. People outside the family saw me as a quiet, devoted, motherly figure, always ready to lend a hand. But inside, I felt trapped, like a bird with clipped wings, unable to soar. I forgot how to nurture my own soul. My emotional needs for companionship, respect, and personal fulfillment had long been buried beneath endless duties. I often find myself revisiting 2 memories that linger like ghosts. One is of Jason's 18th birthday. I had stayed up all night baking his favorite cake and cleaning the house, only for Lisa to tell me outright, "You're just being the help tonight. Don't bother expecting thanks." I smiled through the sting, telling myself it was just a rough day. The other is more recent, last Christmas Eve, when I gave Lisa a hand-knitted scarf. She barely glanced at it and whispered, "Is this all? You know we have so much to do." That night I lay awake, wrapped in the loneliness of my sacrifice, feeling more like a burden than a beloved mother. My home, where I live alone now, mirrors all of this. The faded wallpaper peels in places, just like my spirit, and the worn couch sagging in the corner matches years of emotional exhaustion. The silence in my apartment is thick and heavy, a sharp contrast to the laughter and chatter I used to provide for others. Living here day after day, I carry the weight of being indispensable, yet invisible. The small kitchen where I stir tea alone, the cracked window I lean on to watch the world go by. They tell my story of quiet endurance and lost dreams. This is who I am, a woman who gave everything to her family and learned to forget herself along the way. But deep inside, beneath this tired skin, I still hold a spark, a hope buried beneath years of neglect and sacrifice, waiting for its moment to stir. The invitation was clear, a mandatory tenant meeting to discuss upcoming building renovations, held in the common room of the apartment complex. I knew Chad would be there. He couldn't resist showing up, looking for someone to blame, a face to confront. He had no idea he would find me, The woman he discarded as if I were nothing, standing not as a victim, but as the owner of the building he rented from. That day I arrived early. I dressed simply but carefully. A charcoal gray blazer over dark jeans, hair softly waved and just brushing my shoulders. I didn't look like the woman who once begged for dignity in Amanda's kitchen. The common room filled slowly with tenants, some curious, some annoyed, many indifferent. Then Chad stormed in, his swagger filled with expectation of confrontation. Amanda was right behind him, a shadow of his wrath. Neither looked around. Chad went straight to the property manager at the front, demanding to know where she was, referring to me. The manager stayed calm. "All questions will be addressed during the presentation," he said. Chad scoffed dismissively. Amanda looked down at her shoes. I sat near the back, silent. Every step I took to the front, pounding quietly in my chest, each step like a heartbeat, announcing my presence. The presentation began with routine announcements. Upgrades, timelines, a new security system, updated landscaping, improved insulation, all practical improvements funded by the rent Chad had vociferously protested. Then the manager paused. "We'd like to thank ML Holdings for their commitment to revitalizing the property and prioritizing tenant comfort. The owner is here today. Should anyone have questions?" A hush fell over the room, like the sudden stop of a storm. Every eye snapped to me. I stood up and walked slowly toward the front, steady and calm. Chad's face twisted into confusion, then disbelief. Amanda's mouth parted in shock. I stood tall and said clearly, "Good evening. My name is Margaret. I'm the owner of this building." I could hear a pin drop. Chad's chair scraped loudly as he stood so fast. "You? This is a joke. What kind of game is this?" He spat, voice tinged with panic. I met his gaze, really looked at him, and saw the cracks he'd tried to hide. Sweat on his collar, puffiness under his eyes, the flicker of panic setting in. "No game," I said softly. "Just business." He took a step forward and accused, "You manipulated this. You've been behind this the whole time. You raised our rent. You're trying to ruin us." I held my ground, voice firm. "I gave you a roof. I made improvements. I treated every tenant equally. What I didn't do was forget." He opened his mouth to speak again, but I ignored him and turned to the room. "If anyone has questions about the changes or improvements, I'm happy to answer them after the meeting. Thank you." I stepped aside, feeling the weight of years lift slightly as the meeting resumed. Chad didn't sit down. He stood there, trembling openly, with fury. Amanda sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes wide and glistening with tears. When the room emptied, tenants approached me with quiet thanks, handshakes, questions. Some had suspected, most had no idea. Chad approached last, fury barely restrained. "You think you've won? This is nothing. You've made an enemy." I met his eyes evenly. "No, Chad, you made this. You are the enemy." Amanda stepped between us, pleading, "Chad, stop." Shock flickered across his face. "What did you just—" he began, but I cut in sharply. "Stop," Amanda repeated more loudly. "She's not your enemy. She never was. You are." Chad looked at her as if struck, and in a way, he was. Amanda then turned to me, voice trembling. "I didn't know, I swear, about the building, the money, any of it." I nodded. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you had to see it, not just hear it," she said, blinking back tears. Chad scoffed and stepped back, muttering, "You two deserve each other." "No," I said quietly. "She deserves better." Then I turned and walked away. For the first time since that awful night in their kitchen, I felt something shift inside me. Not vengeance, not satisfaction, but power. Quiet, firm, entirely mine. Days later, Amanda showed up at my door again. Her voice was tentative, and I listened without bitterness. There was sadness, regret, and maybe hope. I wasn't the woman I had been. The woman who sacrificed everything was gone. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer silent. I owned the roof over their heads, the leases they grumbled about. I was the force they never expected, standing strong in the place I had once only dreamed of belonging. Every breath I took was a newfound claim of power. Every small sound in the room, a release, a step toward a life reclaimed. Their humiliation had been loud. Mine was a quiet breaking of chains. The building was mine, the terms mine, the future finally, mine alone. The streetlights flickered weakly as I walked the familiar path home. my feet dragging slightly beneath me. Yet within my chest a strange fire flared, at once fierce and fragile, a promise that I could no longer ignore. The hours ahead stretched uncertain, but something had shifted irreversibly that evening. The weight pressing on my lungs now felt less like a crushing burden and more like a necessary pressure, a force compelling me to rise. Each step brought fresh clarity. That banquet hall, the laughter, the oblivious faces, all replayed in my mind with new sharpness. No longer could I excuse their neglect or soften the edges of their disdain as eccentricities born of love or ignorance. No, their indifference was deliberate, a pattern repeated over decades. I saw it now, the cycle of invisibility, the erosion of my identity beneath their expectations and unspoken demands. The small worn bench where I paused by the park held memories both tender and painful. Sitting there once, years ago, I had listened to my son tell me about his dreams, their glimmer lighting my tired heart. Now, I saw those moments differently, precious but fragile islands amid a sea of being unseen. I traced the rough grain of the wood beneath my fingers, grounding myself in the present, knowing that change would not come without struggle. At home, the walls felt heavier than usual. The dim light flickered overhead, casting long shadows that merged with the gloom lodged firmly inside me. The couch where I collapsed was the same one I'd vacated years ago to chase dreams once shared, but now long abandoned. Sitting there, I pulled my knees close and let the stillness settle around me. In the quiet, memories surged unbidden. Nights spent cleaning the house after everyone else's worries were laid to rest. Birthdays passed with candles unlit because I was too busy prepping for others to notice my absence. Moments when I smiled through exhaustion, telling myself that love meant sacrifice, even when I had nothing left to give. But tonight, the mantra faltered. Love was not meant to erase one's existence. The realization hummed through me, a thread unraveling years of quiet submission. The fact I had normalized my suffering, seen it as duty or love, now felt like a self-imposed cage. I stood, pacing the room in restless circles, trying to untangle the messy knots of grief and resolve within me. The old photograph on the mantelpiece caught my eye. My husband and I decades ago, young and hopeful. The picture was a relic of promises broken over time, silent betrayals steeped beneath years of expectation. My hands trembled as I reached out, fingertips brushing the faded image. It symbolized everything I had held on to, hopes tethered to another's dreams and approval. Now, it was a relic of a story that I would choose to rewrite. A sudden rush of clarity swept through me, making my breath catch. I spoke aloud to the room, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. This ends now. I am more than their shadows. I am worth more. That small but fierce declaration tasted like liberation. It was the first tremor of a shift, the breaking of a dam that had contained years of buried pain. Plans began to take shape, not fully formed, but concrete enough to nourish hope. First, I would reclaim the space that was mine in this home. I would begin to prioritize my needs, set boundaries, even if they were small at first. I recalled the wooden box tucked in my closet, a relic from years past, filled with old letters and keepsakes. It was my own secret trove, a symbol of selfhood that had been neglected, forgotten, beneath years of sacrifice. That box would mark the boundary between who I had been and who I would become. As dawn crept in through the curtains, I felt the first real stirrings of strength beneath my skin. The pain of the night was still raw, but it no longer paralyzed me. Instead, it fueled a slow-burning but resolute fire. I finished my cup of cold tea, the bitter warmth grounding me. A quiet smile touched my lips as I realized the journey ahead was terrifyingly unknown, but entirely mine to own. The breaking point had come, not as a furious explosion, but as a quiet, steady swelling of self-awareness and determination. The road to reclaiming myself was murky and steep, but I was already stepping onto it, one deliberate footfall at a time. The air was still cool against my skin when I opened my eyes that morning. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock, marking each second that felt heavier than the last. Today was the day to stop waiting and start acting. No loud rebellion, no anguished demands, just a steady, deliberate breaking of the pattern that had ruled my life for so long. I began methodically. First, I gathered the remnants of my past that had held me captive. The dusty photo albums, letters yellowed with age, objects given weight by memories of sacrifice and expectation. I set them all on the bed and looked over each piece carefully. Every photograph was a story of a life I had lived for others, the smile I forced for the camera, the achievements of family members where I had stayed silent, unseen. I touched the worn edges of a letter that once contained promises, now forgotten, and with a quiet breath I folded it away. Packing these relics into a large box felt like closing a chapter I had read too many times without ever changing the ending. The box felt surprisingly light when I tapped the lid closed. It was a physical representation of what I was shedding. Old weight lifted, barriers to freedom slowly dismantled. Next, I wrote a letter. It was not fiery or filled with accusations, but firm and clear. This letter was my voice, a declaration of boundaries long ignored. I wrote to those closest to me, those who had grown accustomed to my silent compliance, to let them know I was not invisible any longer, not to be taken for granted, not to be overlooked. The pen shook in my hand at first, but each word increased my resolve. I refused to plead or apologize for seeking respect. Once the letter was finished, I read it aloud to myself, the sound of my own voice, steady and strong. Then I folded it with care and set it aside. This letter was the seed of change, a symbol of my determination. I took immediate steps to change the fabric of my daily life. For so long, my days were dictated by the needs of others, preparing, cleaning, serving, often without thanks or acknowledgement. Now, I wrote a schedule where I carved out moments purely for myself. A walk in the park, an hour with a book, quiet soup shared with only my thoughts. Small acts, but acts nonetheless. Statements that my needs mattered. Boundaries followed. When a call came mid-afternoon, the voice on the other end tentatively asked why I was distancing myself. The son who had drifted away over the years sounded uncertain, his tone probing, but laced with quiet accusation. "Why are you doing this now?" he asked. I answered calmly, "Because I need to be visible, as I am, not as you expect." The line was silent for a long, agonizing moment. Then he muttered, almost to himself, "I never realized." "No, you never did," I replied, the firmness in my voice resolute. The call ended before any repair could be made, but the fissure was necessary. Days that followed were not easy. Invitations came with veiled reproaches. "Is this really how you want to do this?" a sister asked, voice dripping with disbelief. "You're being selfish," said a niece, clearly uncomfortable. They had never imagined I'd break the quiet code of obedience. Yet inside me, a quiet confidence stirred, growing stronger. The physical sensations were subtle but real. I noticed that my posture was straighter. The tight knots in my shoulders eased and my breathing was fuller. My hands no longer trembled when I spoke my truth. Instead, they rested calm in my lap or helped steady my resolve. One morning, I bought a simple jade plant from the local nursery, a small symbol of resilience and new growth. I placed it by my windowsill where it would receive light but demanded little else. That small green presence became a daily reminder that change, though quiet, was alive inside me. The breaking point, however, came unexpectedly. At a family gathering, the usual expectation was that I drop everything to help. Serve food, clean, smooth over tensions quietly. This time, I did not. Instead, I sat calmly, refusing to be swept into my old role. Murmurs swirled around the room like a sudden chill. "Is she really not helping?" someone whispered, eyes fixed on me. Another voice replied, soft but surprised. "What's gotten into her?" I said nothing. I felt a shift within, a powerful sense of just being. That silence was louder than any words I could have spoken. The old rhythm was broken in this subtle defiance, a quiet statement that I would no longer erase myself for others. That night, sitting by the kitchen window beside my jade plant, I traced its glossy leaves with my fingertips. The plant thrived despite its modest needs. Stubborn and patient, so too would I. The hardest moments came not in confrontation but in solitude. Doubts crept in like shadows. Was I cruel, selfish, or just lost? But each doubt was gently dispelled by the memory of all the times I had been invisible, the pain of being quiet for so long. I whispered to myself, "This isn't selfish. It's necessary." My body changed with this quiet revolution. Sleep came easier. Layers of tension peeled away, replaced by a swelling clarity and calm strength. This transformation was not loud or dramatic, but slow and steady, a dawn unfolding after a long night. It marked the beginning of a life lived on my own terms, one deliberate step at a time. And as I closed my eyes each night, I repeated the truth, softly but firmly. I am here. I am enough. The phrase became a mantra, a shield against old doubts. Change had begun, and I embraced it fully. No longer invisible, I was becoming who I was always meant to be. The days following my first act of rebellion were a tempest, battering what little calm I had managed to claim. Amanda's voice haunted my phone, her messages piling up like unrelenting waves. Chad's calls came with growing urgency, each ringing tone a hammer against the fragile walls I was trying so hard to build around myself. The air felt thick with accusations and pleas, masked as admonishments, their words weaving a tapestry of guilt designed to pull me back into the shadows where I'd spent decades hidden. "How could you do this to us, Mom?" Amanda's voice cracked on the voicemail I listened to twice before finally deleting. She sounded broken, but beneath the surface lay that familiar thread of entitlement, expectation that I would yield, as I always had. Chad's texts were sharper, bursting with anger and disbelief. "You're tearing this family apart. You don't understand what you're risking." Despite the flood, I held my ground. The first call from Chad came just days after my quiet act of defiance. Not responding felt like breathing fire into my chest, but silence became my shield. His voice on the other end was raw, desperate, laced with disbelief and pain. "You're punishing us all," he whispered, a frailty that exposed his own guilt I refused to accept. Amanda's follow-up text, "Mom, please, we need to talk. Don't do this to yourself," was met by my unwavering stillness. At home, the intrusion grew. Unanswered calls, unopened messages, the silent knocking late at night, their attempts to wedge themselves back into my life relentlessly. Amanda's figure once lingered by the door, rain drenching her hair, groceries held outwards like a peace offering. I refused to break the barrier. The echo of footsteps fading in the hallway was both a relief and a sting, evidence of their refusal to recognize the boundaries I was setting. 3 distinct efforts to bridge the distance attempted to fracture my resolve. Amanda's trembling voice pleading through a voicemail, where she accused me softly, yet piercingly, of cruelty and selfishness. "You're punishing the people who love you." Chad's barrage of texts escalated in aggression, branding me ungrateful, warning of regret to come. And the late-night knock that stretched through the hours, a ghostly plea for access I denied with closed doors and a locked heart. Isolation crept like a slow tide in the absence of their clamor. The silence at night was a double-edged sword, offering peace yet sharpening the doubts swirling inside me. Was I too harsh? Perhaps cold? Could this path I'd chosen be a mistake? But clarity dawned through the fog of uncertainty. Those years spent as invisible, silent margins in their lives, a mere backdrop to their stories, had to end. My own story demanded voice and space. To protect this newfound sanctuary, I crafted boundaries with precision. Unscheduled visits were banned. Calls filtered through a trusted friend. Technology became a vigilant gatekeeper. I archived their voice notes and messages with a steady hand, a silent record of their attempts to wear me down, a testament to my refusal to be cast aside again. I was no longer the woman who obeyed without question. I was a fortress. Their pressure seeped beyond my walls. Friends and acquaintances became battlegrounds, some choosing sides, others whispering judgments behind curtained windows. Well-meant interventions from others urging reconciliation sought to reclaim the old order where I was the perennial giver, the silent sufferer. But I saw through these facades. This was not healing but a demand for my compliance, a plea to return to the shadows. One confrontation seared deeper than others when an old ally challenged my resolve. "Are you sure this isn't bitterness leading you astray?" Her voice cordial but edged with worry. I felt the sting of alienation as her words landed heavy in my chest. I stood my ground, refusing to be questioned for choosing myself at last. The years had taught me well, not to negotiate my worth for the comfort of others. Lonely nights were peppered with aching solitude, the apartment walls closed in, suffocating, yet also offering a crucible in which my spirit was tested and forged anew. Each morning brought fresh breaths and renewed strength. I found small joys in defiance, moments free from calls, the quiet support of a neighbor's smile, the feeling of space that was mine alone. Through this storm, I began reclaiming my narrative. No longer a victim in the background, I emerged as an author of my own life, drawing new boundaries and nurturing relationships based on respect and reciprocity, not sacrifice. Resisting their attempts to reinstate the old dynamic was a declaration of freedom. My silence was no longer compliance, it was power. Their onslaught may have been fierce, but so was I, steady, unwavering, and deeply resolved. Each refusal, each boundary, was another stone laid in the foundation of a life not dictated by obligation, but chosen on my own terms. As the dust from their retreat settled, I breathed deeply, no longer weighed by invisible chains, but buoyed by newfound liberation. The storm they brought raged outside, but within me, a quiet fire blazed, guiding me into the uncharted horizon of my independence. The weight of unanswered calls and unopened messages pressed heavily on me, each one a tether pulling at my resolve. Days had turned into a haze of silence and solitude since I chose to step away, a fact my family found difficult to accept. Their attempts to reel me back into the old rhythm of sacrifice and submission came in waves, unease and anger flooding every encounter. But beneath the surface of their protests and manipulations, I sensed a deeper fear of change, of losing control over the familiar patterns we had all become accustomed to. The phone buzzed again, a flashing screen that now only stirred discomfort. The name was familiar, a once close friend who had drifted into the fold of family mediators. They called to talk things over, to find some middle ground. My fingers hovered over the decline button, tension coiling tight in my chest. The message was clear. I was expected to return, to resume my place quietly and without question. But how could I? Each call, each message pulled me back into a world where my worth was measured by my sacrifice, my silence, my presence to support the emotional and practical needs of others, while my own needs were forgotten in the margins. Their words, though often veiled in concern, carried the weight of guilt and blame, sharp and unforgiving. "How could you abandon us now?" echoed constantly, a refrain meant to erode my newfound dignity. One evening, the old voices felt too close. The doorbell rang, persistent and urgent. A cousin, the one who had always been quick to judge, showed up, her expression a mix of accusation and false sympathy. "Why are you pushing us away like this? Don't you realize what you're putting everyone through?" she demanded, arms crossed, voice low but firm. I met her gaze steadily. "I'm not pushing anyone away," I said quietly. "I'm building space for myself, and that means setting boundaries, something I never had before." Her eyes flickered with a mix of confusion and resentment. "You're selfish," she shot back, "and ungrateful, after all I've done for you." The sting of her words was deep, but this time something inside me held fast. I didn't flinch. I explained calmly, "It's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's necessary." Even as she left, the silence that returned was heavy but different, less suffocating, less filled with the weight of expectation. Despite the external pressures, moments of doubt crept in during the quiet nights. Was I wrong to resist? Was I breaking something that couldn't be fixed? The loneliness felt vast, but somewhere beneath the surface, a stronger current was building. This was no longer about pleasing others. It was about reclaiming my life. To protect that fledgling strength, I began small rules, small acts of refusal, a text unreturned, a request politely declined. Each act was a gentle defiance, a way to rehearse freedom. The feeling of control over my choices was intoxicating and terrifying. At times, a familiar voice from the past questioned my resolve. An old ally who once stood by me but now seemed uncertain of my transformation reached out with worry veiled in their words. "I don't recognize you anymore," they said softly during one rare phone call. "Are you sure this path is the right one?" I remembered the quiet moments we shared years ago when I felt seen and supported. Now, I knew my journey wasn't about complacency or returning to what once was. I had to answer clearly. I'm discovering who I am without the weight of others' expectations. And yes, this path is mine. The confrontation was a painful but necessary crossroad. It taught me how to hold my ground, not with anger, but with quiet certainty. As the days passed, new boundaries took shape like fragile scaffolding around a building under construction. I grew accustomed to the discomfort of change, learning to say no when once I only knew yes. The isolation was less a prison and more a cocoon where transformation could take root. And then came a day when a letter, long forgotten and tucked away in a drawer, surfaced unexpectedly in my hands. The envelope was discolored, the handwriting familiar yet distant. My breath caught as I unfolded the fragile paper inside. What it revealed shook me to my core. A truth concealed for decades. A betrayal that rewrote the story I thought I knew. Words on the page told of promises broken, of secrets kept to protect. Yes, but at the cost of my understanding and my healing. The flood of emotions was overwhelming. Initially anger, sharp and hot, followed swiftly by a sinking sadness that settled deep within. Yet amidst the turmoil, a strange relief blossomed. The discovery was a key. Unlocking chains I hadn't realized bound me. I sat alone in the dim light of my living room, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. The weight I carried shifted. No longer merely the burden of sacrifice, but a tangled web woven by others' choices. For the first time, I saw clearly the roots of my struggle. Memories revisited themselves with fresh eyes. The moments I'd accepted blame, the silences I'd swallowed. They no longer represented my failings, but mirrored the complexities of those around me and my own resilience. This secret, painful as it was, did not imprison me. It liberated me. It offered a new narrative, one where I was not merely a victim of circumstance, but an agent of change. I realized then that forgiveness, if it came, would be for myself first, acknowledging that my worth was never tied to others' versions of truth or love. Holding the letter close, a quiet determination settled over me. The path forward was no longer obscured by doubt or guilt. I would carry this truth with me as a shield and a beacon. In the days that followed, the true work began, integrating this revelation into the fabric of my life, reshaping my identity around honesty and self-respect. I knew more challenges awaited, but I also knew that freedom, born from painful truths, carried its own profound strength. The sun had sunk low behind the cityscape, casting long shadows over the small, cluttered kitchen where I stood, my hands clenched around a worn envelope. The one piece of evidence that shattered years of silence and falsehoods. My heart pounded not with fear this time, but with something fierce and raw. The air smelled of cold metal and fading grime from the day's rain, the low hum of the refrigerator mixing oddly with the distant city noise. It was time to face him, the man who wore the mask of love and trust, but hid behind lies and manipulation that clawed at my very soul. I pulled my coat tighter, the fabric rough against my skin, and stepped into the dim hallway. Each step felt heavier, as though the weight of years I had carried was now finally dragging behind me to be laid bare. I reached the door of the small, run-down apartment where he had confined me emotionally for so long. I paused, my breath visible in the cold air, a tremor of anticipation mixed with resolve coursing through me. No longer would I be silent or invisible. Tonight, the truth would come into the light. The door creaked open at my knock, and his face appeared, surprise flickering quickly into something like annoyance. I held the envelope up without a word. His eyes darted downward, then returned to mine, narrowing. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The stale smell of cigarette smoke and old regrets filled the space, a stark contrast to the clarity that now burned inside me. "You have some nerve showing up here," he spat, his voice low, attempting to mask the tremor of uncertainty beneath. I clenched my jaw, the past flooding my mind. Decades of self-denial, nights spent awake worrying, endless sacrifices unseen and unappreciated. But tonight was different. Tonight I spoke not for him, not for anyone, but myself. "I'm done playing the victim," I said, voice steady but sharp. "I found out everything. The lies you told, how you used me, the betrayal that's been here all along." I thrust the envelope toward him. "This is the proof." His hand trembled as he took the envelope, his face pale in the fading light. The room seemed to hold its breath with us. I saw the realization dawning in his eyes, the mask slipping, revealing the desperate man beneath. "You think you know everything," he hissed, voice cracking. "You're wrong." For a moment there was silence thick enough to choke on. Then I stepped closer, my gaze unwavering. "I know enough to walk away, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." He stumbled back, anger flaring as he shouted at me, words sharp and bitter. "You ungrateful! After all I did? You think you can just leave? Throw away everything we shared?" I shook my head slowly, the truth cutting through years of his smoke-filled excuses. "This isn't about gratitude anymore. It's about respect, something you never gave me." He lunged forward, but I stepped aside, steady and calm. His anger faltered, replaced by a fragile, desperate need to regain control. But I was no longer his to manipulate. "You'll regret this," he warned, voice a ghost of its former strength. But I was beyond threats. I met his gaze and said simply, "No, I won't." In that moment, something inside him cracked, rage giving way to something resembling fear, or maybe regret. For the first time, I saw the man behind the facade, broken and exposed. I turned away from him, the sound of my footsteps echoing like a drumbeat of liberation. The night air greeted me, cold and clear, filling my lungs with fresh possibility. Outside, the city lights flickered, indifferent and eternal, as if marking my passage from a life of shadows into one of light. As I reached the stairwell landing, I glanced back briefly. He stood there, small and defeated against the dim glow of the hallway, a silent testament to everything I was leaving behind. "I am no longer your prisoner," I whispered to the empty space between us, and with that, I closed the door, not just to that apartment, but to the past that had bound me. The secrets unearthed were not a cage, but a key. Tonight marked the end of silence, the birth of my voice. The night was mine, vast and uncharted, and I was free. Freedom tasted like cold air, bitter-sweet but exhilarating. My heart still raced, but it was not the frantic pounding of fear. It was the steady beat of a soul reclaimed. I stepped into the dark with open eyes, ready to forge the path ahead. No longer hiding, no longer silenced. I was whole, and I was free. I left the house before dawn, the air crisp and still around me. In the quiet of the morning, the world felt different, lighter, as if the weight I'd carried all these years had finally begun to lift. The streetlights flickered momentarily as I passed, casting brief shadows that seemed to dance away from me, not towards me. I breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill my lungs, a stark contrast to the suffocating nights spent in silence and doubt. Returning to my apartment, I noticed everything with fresh eyes. The faded wallpaper, once a reminder of better days, now looked like a gentle canvas ready for new colors. The musty scent mingled with the faint aroma of brewed tea left on the kitchen counter, a small comfort from last night. I moved through the space deliberately, touching surfaces that held memories but no longer held me captive. In the corner of the room stood an old plant, its leaves drooping but still alive. I reached out and tended to it, trimming dead branches and watering the earth at its base. The act was simple, almost meditative, yet it symbolized something profound, a nurture not given to others but to myself. As I cared for that plant, I felt a surge of hope begin to bloom inside me. Later I lit a candle and held a small ritual. Nothing grand, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been and what could be. With each flicker of the flame, I affirmed my right to live for myself, to breathe, to dream, to be seen and heard, without apology. The shadows on the wall seemed less intimidating now, softening with the dance of light. I opened a new notebook, its pages crisp and waiting. I began to write, not out of obligation, but from a place of desire, to chart my path forward, to explore who I was beneath the layers of sacrifice and silence. Words flowed hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, painting a landscape of possibility. A few days later, a neighbor stopped by unexpectedly. She brought fresh bread and a genuine smile, a small gesture that felt enormous. We spoke of simple things, weather, community, poetry, and in her presence, I felt seen in a way I had almost forgotten. It wasn't a pity or a duty, it was connection, born of mutual respect and kindness. The apartment began to fill with new light, both literal and metaphorical. I rearranged the furniture, letting fresh air and sunlight in through open windows. The colors shifted from dull grays to warm yellows and soft blues, reflecting the shift within me. Music floated softly from the kitchen, a soundtrack for renewal. Reflecting on the past, I recognized the struggles without allowing them to define me. Each hardship had been a thread in the tapestry of my growth, and now I could weave future designs with deliberate intention. There was no bitterness left, only the quiet strength of someone who had reclaimed her own story. Standing by the window one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I whispered to myself, "I am enough." The phrase settled deep within, steady and true. Behind me, the room glowed warmly, a sanctuary crafted from resilience and hope. This new life, fragile and beautiful, stretched out before me, a landscape uncharted but inviting. I stepped forward, every breath a promise, every heartbeat a testament to the freedom I had fought to claim.